to welcome you to the April edition of Hormones to Harmony, a menopause wellness series. Now, I think the menopause wellness series is so important because many of us women have no idea what menopause is, what to expect, and the fact that there are so many symptoms that come along with menopause that we need a series to better understand what to look out for, what you're going to experience, and if you're experiencing something, what it could possibly be, right? So I'm Denise Stegall. I am the menopause mentor, and I am also a longevity concierge because, once we go through menopause, we're in postmenopause and we're looking to truly live a long and active life. So today I am actually going to talk a little bit about menopause. Is it secretly sabotaging your career and your relationships? Now, if you're in your 50s, you're going, yeah, whatever. If you're in your mid 30s and or early 40s, you're thinking, that's not me. I don't have that problem. But let me tell you, there are some symptoms of perimenopause, and I'll explain the phases of menopause real quick. But there are some symptoms of perimenopause that so many women experience, and they don't realize it's part of the hormonal shifts that happen or that occur during perimenopause. So let me just explain real quickly what the heck is menopause, right? Perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. Okay, it's very confusing. I heard a speaker once on the topic of menopause who basically said menopause doesn't mean anything. It's not a real word, right? It basically means that your menses have paused or stopped, right? So, okay, big deal, right? But there's so much more going on. So perimenopause are the years leading up to menopause, and I'll explain this in a minute. So perimenopause actually can begin in your mid 30s. Yes, ladies, you heard me correctly, mid 30s. I was 37 when I started to really notice symptoms. Actually, more likely, my husband started to notice more symptoms. So this is why I think it's so important for us to have these conversations about perimenopause and the things that can occur. So menopause, everybody thinks, oh, menopause, where I'm in menopause. Actually, menopause actually is a one-day event. Yes, a one-day event. It is the 12th anniversary of the last time you had your period. So the following day, you are now postmenopausal. So now you're in postmenopause. So, we all think of this, I'm in menopause. Really, it's you're perimenopausal until that day when you have hit menopause. And then from every day that you are living and breathing after that, you are postmenopausal. So this is actually a long time phase in our lives. Like we think this is like midlife. We talk about this as midlife women. But it really can affect women who are much younger, and it still affects us as we age. So what I want to do is probably introduce myself again. No, I did. I introduced myself. I'm Denise Stegall, menopause mentor. I am going to find my slides. Okay, so again, is menopause secretly sabotaging your relationships and your career? Okay, some things that you want to know. Now, I know you are a successful woman. You are juggling a successful career and family. You've got a full plate. I mean, let's be real. We have full plates nowadays. And you have been at the top of your game, but lately something feels off, right? Something's not quite right. You snap at your partner for no real reason. You can't quite focus the way you used to. And no matter how much you try, exercise, meditation, sleep, you always feel like you're running on empty, right? You're always, kind of in this high energy state. Where your body is always kind of at that flight or fight a feeling. So that is really stressful, especially for entrepreneurs, for successful business owners, and career women, because this loss of control can seriously creep in very quietly at first, but have a real punch when it comes to how you lead, how you talk to your team, and how people actually respond to you. Now, the kicker here, of course, is it's not just stress. Yes, there is stress in all of that, but on top of the stress, there is something else going on, and it's not all in your head. So many times people will say, will tell me that they've been to the doctor and they said, well, there's nothing really wrong with me. It's just in my head. I'm getting older. But here's something that I want to explain. This is really, really critical. Um, some of these struggles may be signs of perimenopause. I mentioned perimenopause before, right? And often, very often, they are misdiagnosed or they're completely overlooked, and leave women feeling that they have been unseen, unheard. Maybe it's all in their head. Maybe I am just getting older. All of the things that start to creep in, self-doubt starts to creep in. And that increases our stress level. And stress is really bad for life, but it's really bad when it comes to menopause. And for those of you who haven't quite started to feel these shifts, I think it's important for you to be listening, because this way you will know what to expect. Just going to take a second and say hello to someone who just popped in. Okay, very good. Hello, Lisa. Let's see. So I have been talking about menopause secretly sabotaging our careers and our relationships. So some of the things that I'll talk about, I'll get to in a second. Let me just kind of move my slides forward. Again, that's me. I introduced myself earlier. I'm Denise Stegall, menopause mentor. So do you ever feel like you're just out of control, like you just don't have control of the things that you used to have? Things like your career, all of the things that you've worked up to in your career, in your business, whatever it may be. And you reach a certain level of success, and you still have the drive and you still have these dreams, but yet your body is kind of going, I don't know if I can do this. How about when you're at home? Like, do you just not have the energy to do things that you used to do or enjoy doing? Does this lady over here on the bottom right kind of look like you sometimes? Like, I just can't take it anymore. I don't know what's going on. I don't feel good. I don't have energy. I have a headache. I just don't feel like myself. Well, if that is the case, you are not alone. There are so many women who are in this same boat. Yet the challenge is we've never really talked about it. If you look at or ask your mom, ask your grandmother, what menopause was like for them, they really can't give you an answer because it's not something they are comfortable talking about. My mother apparently, as when my sister and I were chatting with her one day, she said, well, I didn't really go through any of that. And my sister and I, of course, looked at each other like, well, lady, yeah, you did, because you were crazy for 2 years. And of course, this was at a time where hormone replacement therapy and all of the supplements that we have to help manage perimenopause and menopause, we really didn't have those at the time that my mom was going through menopause, and potentially yours too. So it's really stressful when you don't know what's going on, and you go to the doctor and they're not really helpful either. Why this is important is so often the things we go to the doctor for are misdiagnosed. They diagnose depression, stress, anxiety, low energy. If you go to the doctor and you've been having mood swings or you're just not quite feeling yourself, these are the things that the doctors would tell you. Oh, you have mild depression. Well, it's, you have additional stress. You have to work on your stress. You're struggling or suffering with anxiety. And the low energy, I mean, you're busy. So of course, and they'll tell you, get more sleep, which is great. We should do that. But what's really important though, is the actual cause of many of these. Now, of course, not all. Sometimes people do go to the doctor and they are suffering from clinical depression. Clinical depression is very different than mood swings. So, truly, the actual cause of so many of the things that we're stressed out about are hormonal fluctuations, easy for me to say, and imbalances. Now, during perimenopause, like hormones are up and down and up and down like crazy. By the time you kind of reach that menopause year, they're slowly declining. There's a lot less of the highs and lows. I mean, think about when you were when you were started to get your period, PMS, premenstrual syndrome, mood swings. Those are the things that we often talk about when we're just starting our menses. And that can go all through perimenopause. Often during perimenopause, it gets worse. And so this is where later on I'll talk a little bit about what to do to counter these things. But today, I want to talk about three specific things that can be affecting your career and your relationships. But in what ways? Obviously, your work. If you don't have the energy, if you're getting headaches, if you have mood swings, all of the early phases of or all the early symptoms of menopause or perimenopause, that can affect your work, right? And if you're working with people who don't understand what you're going through, that can be a real challenge because they're looking at you like, what's wrong with you? You're not keeping up with your workload, or you show up late, or you're difficult to talk to, whatever it may be, right? Someone else's perception of you as you're dealing with these can affect your work, right? But relationships, I say this all the time. Obviously, personal relationships can really get affected, and we think it's usually just with our spouse. But what about the kids? Like I mentioned before, my mom was a crazy lady for like 2 years, and I'm really glad she doesn't watch this because she'd be really mad at me telling you guys that. But she was really difficult. Like we didn't know from 1 minute to the next, almost, what her moods were going to be like. And that was really stressful as a teenager who's already going through stuff on herself, right? So relationships can be affected. And then, of course, if you don't feel good and you have a headache and you're moody, how does that affect having fun? Well, you don't want to do it, right? You don't spend the time with your friends. You start to, not answer their phone calls, or you don't respond to texts, things like that. And so you start to spend more and more time alone, which is never a good thing because you need that community. You need those people to say, hey, this is, I'm going through this too. So the important piece here is being aware of what's happening and what could be causing it is going to help you with prevention, and being able to go to your doctor with good information. Never go to a doctor and just say, Doc, I don't know what's wrong with me. This is your time to write down what's going on. How do you feel? All of the symptoms. And I'm a big fan of logging everything. All of my clients hate it, but I always have them log their food, especially for the first 2 weeks, their food, their mood, their activities, their energy level. You'd be amazed at how when you start doing that for a few weeks, you'll start to see patterns. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, many, many days, especially when I first moved to Minnesota, and I'll tell you about that later, I had a really bad headache by 3 p.m. So I knew I had a headache most days, but I didn't realize until I started tracking. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few. So key symptoms, we're going to talk about mood changes, sleep disturbances, and headaches. I definitely like to talk about headaches because I'm someone who is prone to them. And during not so much perimenopause, but when I got closer into my menopause year, those headaches went crazy. And again, it's because of the fluctuating hormones. So to talk about hormones, speaking of hormones, I love this. I have a couple of these slides. This is from my friends over at the Happy Hormone Cottage in Ohio. And this is just kind of a quick snapshot of what your hormones do. Now, hormones for a woman, we always think of them as, they're our sex hormones, they're our reproductive hormones. Progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone do so much more, ladies. Um, Progesterone, that starts dropping when you're 35. That's when you start to notice you're not sleeping as well. Maybe your moods are going, kind of a little bit wonky. 35, yes, that's when it starts to drop. And I think I have a slide in a few minutes that will actually show by age how quickly that drops. Now, estrogen, this amazes me, has either between 300 and 400 jobs that it performs in the body. At the time we created this slide, we knew of 300. There has been some additional research that's showing that it's probably closer to 400 jobs that that estrogen does in our body. That's a lot, right? One of them is to protect our cognitive function. It's cardioprotective. Well, there's maybe a connection there for why heart disease is the number one killer of women as they get older, as their estrogen starts to drop. Kind of amazing, right? I'm not going to get really too deeply into this in this talk, but certainly in other conversations, I'll talk a little bit more about estrogen and progesterone. Testosterone, just real quick, helps build new bone. Definitely, it's a sex hormone. We need that, and it helps with energy. I mentioned before, the sleep disturbances, energy, all of those things. We need all three of these hormones. And of course, there are other hormones that come into play, but these are the three main ones that I'd like to talk about. Let's see. Da, da, da. Fluctuating moods. No, it's not all in your head. Sometimes I think it is all in my head because my moods at one point in time just were all over the place. And it was like every hour I felt a little different. But with the estrogen and progesterone shifts, you're going to experience irritability. And this is where that anxiety, depression piece came in, like I mentioned earlier. Irritability, definitely, we know that. But the sadness and the anxiety, it is elevated during these hormonal fluctuations. Part of it has to do with sleep, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. When we're not sleeping, our cortisol levels, there we go, another hormone, right? Well, cortisol levels are constantly elevated. Those are our flight or fight. I'm going to say that right at some point in my life. Hormones, right? And of course, when they're elevated all the time, of course, we're going to feel a little bit of anxious, a little bit of stress there. And of course, stress, everybody has a little bit of stress. A little bit of stress in life is okay. But when the stress never stops, that's when we need to really look into what we're doing to modify that. Excuse me. If you're an entrepreneur, right? How does this impact? And I may actually put this in here. I may actually have a slide. There we go. How does it impact? It impacts your ability to lead. It impacts it impacts the way your people interact with you, right? Your relationships at home and at work really get a little strained. I remember at one point before I figured out what was going on with me with perimenopause. And again, I mentioned earlier, I was 37 when I really started to notice that I was having perimenopausal symptoms, specifically the mood, the irritability, and really my poor husband, God bless him. I really did snap at him for no reason whatsoever. So relationships are a huge part of the struggles that we have when it comes to perimenopause, right? But also we start second guessing ourselves. You say something and like, oh, why did I say that? I didn't really mean that. How do you manage a team, or how do you run a business when you don't feel well yourself and you can't control your moods and the things that are kind of coming out of your mouth? Because sometimes it is kind of hard. What else? Additionally, when it comes to work, it can affect how you make your decisions, how you negotiate, and how you handle conflict. If you're already conflicted inside with your hormones, and maybe you're part of the problem, How do you manage that? That's really not an easy metaphor. But think of it this way. It's like trying to steer a ship during a storm, right? You might stay afloat, but that ride, the ride is really rough, and everyone on board is gonna feel it, right? So what do we do? First and foremost, for those of you who know me, I will say this ad nauseum: eat real food. How do you fix your mood swings? Nutrition, nutrition, nutrition. When we are eating whole foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts and seeds, and our lean proteins and fatty fishes, we're giving our body a chance, right? We're giving it everything it needs to work optimally. When our hormones are not quite working optimally, at least our nutrition is fighting for us, okay, right? Um, Stress management. Ooh, yeah, I talk about stress a little bit, don't I? Stress is part of life, right? But how we manage stress, or how do we um, step back and kind of recuperate from stress, whether it's everyday stress, work stress, um, your mother's driving you crazy stress, whatever it may be. Um, and then hormonal support. This I think is really important. I'm not going to talk too much about this, about the hormonal support. I will talk about this in other uh, wellness series in another talk, because there's so much involved with hormonal support. Now, if you're just starting in perimenopause, again, I started feeling it at 37. Many women really just say, they were in their early 40s when they started to notice. Hormonal support you can be found in lots of different ways. One, nutrition. There we go. I told you I'm going to talk about nutrition. Eat real food, eat real food, eat real food. But then there are also some absolutely fantastic supplements. I was very fortunate that I found a company. Well, I say very early on. It wasn't very early on. It was after like a year and a half of searching and trying things that didn't work, till I found a company that really was fantastic, and I recommend them all the time. And I can give you guys a link at the end. I don't get any kickbacks from them. They don't have an affiliate program. Really wish they did, but I believe in them and their support, hormonal support. And of course, there's also HRT and bioidentical hormones therapy. That's all I'm going to talk about that. The important piece here is to recognize what's going on when it comes to your moods. Again, is there a time in the day where you're doing you feel better, or your mood starts to kind of wane at 3 o'clock? Is it because you're hungry? That can affect it, right? Blood sugar affects our nutrition, or affects our blood sugar. Sorry, wrong circle. And that affects so many other things that are going on in your body, but it absolutely affects our mood, right? I mean, there was all those commercials where with Danny DeVito, like when you're hangry. There is something to that, but it also affects us hormonally, and it will definitely affect our mood. So recognize what's going on. Once you recognize, we can find some kind of, I say balance here, but it really is harmony. Nothing's ever balanced, 50-50, right? But we do need to find some kind of harmony with everything that's going on in our life, right? And that's how we thrive. So, anybody have, what, we'll leave questions till the end. Sleep disturbances. This is such a big challenge, and this is really an energy drain for anyone at any age. But at this stage in life, sleep disturbances, whether that's you fall asleep and then you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're awake all night, for the rest of the night, or you wake up several times in the night. When we're not getting a good night's sleep, we're not getting that REM sleep, that's interrupted sleep cycle. Our cortisol is going up again. Remember, I mentioned again, cortisol. So we're never actually getting out of flight or fight. What else is going on? Let's see. Progesterone. Progesterone, that first one we mentioned in that earlier slide. This is your calming hormone. And this is one of those hormones that starts declining at age 35. Yes, I said that again, age 35. I know it's really hard to believe, right? You're 35 years old. You're like, most people are like, still having kids at 35. And you're like, wait a minute. menopause, perimenopause? How can that be? It actually can be, because that is just what our crazy bodies do, right? When you think how long initially, like people didn't always live very long. Our life expectancy, was probably 50, maybe 60 in many, many generations. But now, we're living into our, 70s, 80s, and beyond. My mom is 83. No, she was just 83 in December. But I have an aunt who's 87, right? So life expectancy has changed. So yes, at 35, you think 35 to 87, that's a long time, right? At 35, you're starting perimenopause. At 87, you're postmenopausal. But these hormones still are affecting you in every way. So, okay, so interrupted sleep cycles, night sweats. Anybody got those? I don't have them so much anymore. Every now and then I do. Racing thoughts, right? Again, increased cortisol. Lack of sleep goes back to our mood. It affects our mood. It affects our productivity. And it actually, for anyone who is an athlete or likes to think of themselves as an athlete, physical recovery, right? I used to run half marathons. I don't do that much anymore. Maybe a 6 mile run is a long run for me now. 3 or 4 is kind of my unit dose, because I know I don't recover as fast. So even though I used to run, say, 20, 25 miles a week, I can't do that anymore, right? Part of it is my body just doesn't respond to, and part of it is, even though I'm doing really well with my menopausal symptoms, I have most things under control, but there's still times when I wake up in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm wide awake. Nothing really going on in my head, no reason other than, my hormones are still, fluctuating a little off balance. So again, when it comes to work and career, when your sleep suffers, how do you show up for work, right? How do you show up for your family? And are you showing up the way you want to? Probably not, right? So I think of it this way. So, sleep is like, when you charge your phone overnight, right? If the battery doesn't fill up like by midday, it's dead, right? Or it's at 10% and running on fumes. That's exactly what's happening to you. If you're getting 5 or 6 hours of sleep, sometimes for some women, 6 hours of sleep, they'd be happy to have that. But if you're only getting 5 or 6 hours or less of sleep, rather than the 7 to 9 hours that are recommended for optimal health, I'm an 8 hour girl. If I don't have 8 hours of sleep, I know I'm not great the next day, right? So what do we do? What do we do to help our sleep? Do we take medication? What do we do? I put this line in here before we get to what do we do. I mentioned progesterone and sleep is progesterone is that calming hormone. But you could just see, and I'm not going to really go through this, but you can see all of the many things that progesterone does. And here, slowly, kind of like midway through the list here, what it protects against. It protects against insomnia. It protects against irritability. Insomnia, disrupted sleep, and irritability go together, and they affect your mood, and that affects your relationship, and it affects your career, and all of the things that you're trying to be successful in life. So solutions, sleep solutions, restorative routines. I like that. It's kind of a alliteration, so I like that. How do you what are you doing before you go to bed? So of course, we've talked about many, many times, we hear, turn off the TV, turn off the phone, don't bring your phone into your bedroom. I never bring my phone into my bedroom. My husband does, drives me crazy. But often if he's on call, he has to have the phone there. But I'll find him, I'll be asleep, I'll wake up, maybe to go over to the bathroom, and he's looking at his phone, checking scores from the basketball game, the baseball game. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning. Really? What is he doing? Now, when it comes to men and hormones, that's a whole different animal. Apparently, it does not affect his sleep. But as women with sleep issues anyway, keeping away from the phone. And The other thing I will mention, and I've had to be really cognizant of this, especially when I'm traveling. I travel with an e-reader. What is it called? Whatever, the e-reader. Kindle. I have a Kindle. And I love to read books while I'm on vacation. The worst thing I can do is to grab that e-reader before I go to bed. And it's fine if I'm doing it during the day, if I'm out, if at the beach or at the on the, just kind of hanging out. But if I'm doing it at night, I do notice that my sleep is messed up. Support progesterone naturally. I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. You want to guess what I'm going to say? Eat real food. Yes, obviously. If we're going to do natural things to help our body through perimenopause, all through postmenopause, we really need to make sure that we're eating well and eating foods, especially before we go to bed. We don't want to be eating a heavy meal before we go to bed. They say at least 2 hours. They say, the research basically shows that you're best if you finish eating at least 2 hours before you go to bed. Now, sometimes, on a weekend, if you're at a party, that doesn't work. Those are exceptions to the rule, right? But supporting your progesterone with real food. And then, of course, your sleep hygiene. That's another one of those weird phrases. But by this, we're really talking about going to bed at the same time, keeping your bedroom cool, making sure that the lights are all off, blackout curtains, whatever it may be. A lot of times when I'm traveling, I always wear a silk eye patch when I like the way it feels. But this way, if my husband does get up in the middle of the night, if he does have the phone, I don't see that light. But also, in the summertime, when the sun comes up really super early, I live really far north, so the sun can come up well before I want to get out of bed. It will help me to continue to sleep. So all of these things, and I forgot to turn off my phone. So sleep hygiene practices, and you know what? They're different for everybody, right? One of the things that I talked about with a friend of mine the other day. She loves to read before bed, so she'll get a book. And she told me a couple of weeks ago when we were chatting that she hadn't been sleeping well. And so I was asking her about her sleep hygiene. And she said that, she's been reading this series, but it's a murder series. Really? Before you go to bed, you're reading a murder series. I said to her, I said, well, no wonder why you're not sleeping, because you're getting yourself riled up, and you've kind of got your flight or fight, even though it's not you physically, but when you're reading something that's emotionally charged, you're charging your emotions. And once you get that high, you really need to take the time to kind of slow down and kind of ease your emotions. Sometimes, I told her, if that's the case, take a shower, take a bath, meditate before bed, whatever it may be. But finally, she did say to me she stopped reading those books before she went to bed. So that's anything else about sleep. I'm just gonna read my notes. Oh, so I mentioned food wise, a couple of food things: salmon, avocado, nuts and seeds. Again, eat real food, but those are foods that will help you to keep progesterone naturally supported. Now, this is one that I struggled with, and I still struggle with. And for those of you who don't know me, I'll be 54 in 3 weeks, and I'm 3 years postmenopausal. So I started early. There's probably a reason for that that we'll talk about another time. But headaches. Now, I had been prone to headaches, stress headaches, tension headaches. And I guess about 15 years ago, I went to a dentist and he asked me how often I've been getting these headaches. And I looked at him and I went, how do you know I have headaches? He's a dentist. And he said, by looking at the marks on my teeth, I obviously grind or clench my teeth at night. So my headaches subsided a bit. So that was a good thing. Prior to that, though, when I first moved to Minnesota, I live up in southeast Minnesota. Between the cornfields and the cows, basically. I'm from New York originally, so very, very different. When I moved here almost 23 years ago, for the first year, I had a headache every single day, all year long. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I mean, seriously, I was living on caffeine and Excedrin. Without them, I couldn't function. And this was by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I had mentioned this earlier. When you start tracking, you start to see patterns. So by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I just had such a horrible headache. I wasn't working at the time. I had just, when I got married and before the year that I moved to Minnesota before I got married, I was volunteering, I was planning a wedding. So I wasn't really doing anything business wise or really that was really stressful. So why was I getting these headaches? Well, went to my OBGYN for my first annual appointment here at the clinic here in Minnesota. And the OBGYN asked me any question, anything else going on. And I told her about these headaches. So she sent me to the neurologist. Went to the neurologist, head of neurology, who knocked on my elbows, knocked on my knees, asked me a couple of questions and said, okay, I'm going to put you on an antidepressant. And I said, what the bleep for? And he's like, well, you want to get rid of these headaches? And I'm like, but don't you want to find out what's causing them? Absolutely had no interest in figuring out what was causing these headaches. But he was going to give me an antidepressant because he said, but we find that a low dose antidepressant, works for, these kind of headaches for girls like you. What? I was like 33 years old. Okay, granted, he was probably 80, but still, I mean, talk about, shocker, like he just dismissing me. And this is one of the challenges that women have. I mentioned this earlier, is that we go to the doctor with these new things that are going on, whether it's anxiety, mood swings, sleep problems, whatever it may be, and they want to give us an antidepressant. 70% of women, middle-aged women, 35 to maybe 50, who go to their doctors with one of these symptoms are prescribed an antidepressant. Now, that doesn't mean that they're all taking them and, filling the prescriptions. I would imagine most of them, like me, are looking at their doctors like, well, thanks for nothing, because it's not what's going on. Obviously, hormonal shifts are, if hormonal shifts are causing your headaches, an antidepressant's not going to address that, right? Again, there are people who go to their doctor and they truly are struggling from depression. But again, depression is very different from having mood swings. So what's going on with these headaches and these migraines? As your estrogen dips, right, your blood vessels actually, no, your blood vessels and your transmitters. Let me think, hold on. Now I'm not thinking clearly. Your estrogen dips, which disrupts your blood vessels and neurotransmitters, which trigger these headaches. And a lot of times we do just kind of think, oh, it's just stress, tension headache, whatever. I didn't sleep last night, whatever it may be. Allergies. Oh my gosh, I live in Minnesota. So the end of to finish my story about my headaches, I'm allergic to everything that grows in Minnesota, right? I left that doctor. I was chatting with somebody who ended up being an ear, nose, and throat doctor. And he said to me, he goes, you might want to try Claritin. Guess what? Claritin took care of much of those headaches, especially early on. Now, at this stage in my life, as I'm a little bit older and my hormones are definitely, kind of declining or have been declining, I do get headaches a little bit more frequently, and not tension headaches, but some serious headaches. But again, when you have a good amount of estrogen, like a optimal amount of estrogen, you're going to have fewer hormone related headaches. I mean, right, duh, right, Denise? This is an interesting fact. You actually have increased connectivity in your brain. So estrogen, I mentioned earlier, I keep saying that estrogen actually is neuroprotective. Right? It's cardioprotective, it's neuroprotective. That's because there's a lot more going on. Estrogen is actually helping your brain to function better. So when you start to decrease, your memory also starts to decrease. That's where the brain fog comes in. And a lot of people who I talk to, a lot of my clients tell me, the headaches and the brain fog kind of come together. Now, I don't know if that's everybody. I've noticed that myself, on and off. Um, but I'm really fortunate that I have been through this journey. I've been on the journey since I was 37, and I hope to be on this journey till I'm really, really old and really far into old age. Um, so the memory piece is another aspect of um, the headaches and the estrogen challenges. So when we have high estrogen, we've got great memory, right? You can think of things, you can make decisions, really good decisions, snap decisions, but they're good, solid decisions, right? As we start to lose that estrogen, again, you're going to get those headaches that are triggered. It's going to disrupt those neurotransmitters. We're not going to think as clearly. That, again, is where we kind of find we have lack of clarity, a little bit of brain fog, and doing things. It just takes longer to do things. Part of it is brain fog. You're just kind of sitting there scratching your head going, wait, what was I doing? Oh, okay, right. Or you walk into a room and you go, oh, what did I come in here for? That happens a little bit more. Now that's typical, like that is typical of aging, but a little bit of that has to do with the drop of estrogen. um, when you have a headache, think about this. You have less patience. Again, your lack of clarity, lack of ability to perform, whether that's at work, with your family. Think about driving a car. If you're driving and you're stuck in traffic and you have a headache, how much worse that is. Do you make good decisions then? Probably not. Excuse me. Um, the way I always think of a headache now, for years, I was one of those people that had like kind of a low grade headache for a very long time, especially like I mentioned that first year that I lived here. And it was kind of like static in the background. Remember the radio? When you play the radio in the car and you just hear this, this like just constant static. It wasn't really loud, but it was there. Um, and you can still function, right? But and you could still hear the music, but it would kind of fade in and out, right? So it's draining. Like those low grade headaches can be really, really draining. So here we go. Let's talk a little bit about estrogen. I mentioned this earlier. This diagram again is from my friends over at Happy Hormone Cottage in Ohio. If you live in Ohio, I absolutely recommend, if you're 35 and older, to place a call with them because they're just phenomenal. So here's our hormone levels, right? So again, estrogen affects our mood, it affects those headaches, it affects our energy, all the things that estrogen does is quite amazing. Again, I mentioned 300 to 400 jobs that estrogen has in our female body, right? Heart protection, brain protection, protects against Alzheimer's, against osteoporosis, also thyroid disease. How many women do you know in their 60s, 70s, into their 80s, like my mom for the last 20 years, has had hypothyroidism? And it turns out that the lack of estrogen has affected that. So, as she puts it, and her friends put it, well, it just happens as you get older. You're just going to have a thyroid. You're just going to have a thyroid issue. It's actually not a thyroid issue. It's a lack of estrogen issue. So it's just amazing that estrogen plays such a huge role in our life, and we think it's just something we need for sex and for having children, fertility, but this is something that absolutely affects every aspect of our life in every stage of our life. So just a little bit about that, and I just put this in here because I really love to show this diagram. So here we go. So in your 20s, your estrogen's not completely up there because you're still working on you're still kind of teenager, early adult. But as you see, from 20 to 30, estrogen increases. At 35, that's when we're like at the top of our hormone levels. But then you can see at age 40, it starts to drop. Look at this at age 50. Like you got half the amount of hormone, estrogen. I mean, I kind of wonder if you're taller, if you have more estrogen. Probably not. I'm only 5 foot tall. But look at this, from 50 to 60, look at that jump. And then for ladies that are in their 70s and 80s, no wonder why women start to really struggle with so many health challenges. I don't want to call them diseases because there are different things from the time we start in our 50s, right? So estrogen is essential, and estrogen, as it drops, is going to affect your those headaches. So solutions, I love solutions. For some people, they're kind of not really solutions, but for some people, it's like, oh yeah, duh. One, balance hormones. Um, the best way to find, to balance hormones, or at least to have them in harmony, is to take a test. Your regular doctor will fight you on it, but you can get them to agree to a full hormone panel. I get a Dutch test, which is from a functional medicine doctor, who I have in addition to my regular doctor. And what's important is, when it comes to those tests, they're not 100% because they're taking, whether it's blood or urine or saliva, they're taking basically just a snapshot of where you are today at this moment. The Dutch test actually takes, it's a urine test over 24 hours. So it's a little bit, it gives you a little bit more time, but still, we know our hormones are constantly fluctuating. So again, it's a snapshot. But what I think is important is you need to know where you are, right? You've got all these things happening, the headaches, the sleep disturbances, the mood challenges, all of these things. And I'm only touching on three issues or three symptoms of menopause today. All of those things we're just affected by so many different things. So when we know where we are hormonally, it gives us the ability to say, okay, well, this is where I was today. For example, when I took my first Dutch test, my estrogen and my testosterone were both, like, literally, if you're looking at, like, if the way they measure it is like a gas tank, full is great. Mine was on empty. No wonder why I was suffering so much. Right. And so my regular doctor's like, well, it doesn't really show. Empty is empty. Right. It wasn't like, oh, it's just a little less than full. No, this was empty. So again, it's a great way to understand where you are today so you can progress and you really, kind of help yourself to move forward. Because if we don't know our own body, our doctors really can't help us. Most of our OBGYNs are not trained in menopause. The word perimenopause was never even used when I was going through it at 37. No one, even the menopause specialist, did not mention the word perimenopause. So ladies, if you're 35 and over, there are hormonal changes, fluctuations that are happening. We just need to know what's going on in our body and how to help it. So again, back to headache solution, hydration and nutrition. So many people will say to me, oh yeah, well, I drink water. Sometimes you see people walking around with, these huge things of water, water bottles. Maybe they're drinking it, maybe they're not. Hydration, if you start to get a headache and you drink water, it's amazing how quickly, it may not completely go away, but it will start to subside. And of course, nutrition. We need to make sure that we're eating that real food, stay away from anything that is processed, in bags, pre-made. The next one I think is really important. Avoid, and I mean avoid, artificial sweeteners. Not just cut back, I mean avoid them like the plague. Erythritol, if there's something that I take a sip of or a bite of that has erythritol, instant headache. These are not things your body recognizes. They basically recognize them as a toxin or an invader, and your body is attacking them. Well, no wonder why we don't feel good after we eat them, and our headache, we get a headache. These last three are really simple. I'm not, I'm kind of preaching to the choir. I realize, manage our stress, whatever that means to you, whether it's going for a walk in the woods, whether it's journaling or meditating. Sleep, we've got to with menopause, sleep, we need to work on our sleep because our sleep is a problem because the sleep causes headaches and the the lack of sleep then causes mood swings. So you can see where this is all connected, right? And truly, this is an opportunity to track your symptoms, track your food, track your mood, track your energy, anything that makes sense to you. Like some days I this morning I worked out this morning. I today was a weight day. Um, Now I know when I was doing some of my weights, like, I did it. I was working out about an hour and a half later than I normally do. Huh, felt a little bit stronger in some of the exercises that I was doing. So I could lift a little bit heavier. I wonder why that is. Track that. I tracked that. Well, of course, why? I hadn't eaten this morning. I typically don't eat a lot before I work out, but because I worked out a little bit later, that affected my body. So all of these things we need to know, like, you know your body better than anyone, right? It's always giving you signals. This is a time to pay attention to those signals. And truly, recognizing that, the hormonal roots that truly this will lead to effective prevention, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease. Another thing that I think that's important with headaches, I mentioned hydration and nutrition. Another piece is magnesium. Most women are low in magnesium, so that is a something else to kind of put into your toolbox. Let's see. Okay, so symptoms, they're signals. They're not random. Once you understand what's going on, then you are in control. I started this presentation by saying, do you ever feel like you're out, losing control? Our hormones can absolutely make us feel like we're going out of control. But with understanding and taking a proactive approach, we can absolutely control what is happening. So just quick recap, mood swings, poor sleep, nagging headaches, not random, like I mentioned, can be part of it can be stress, but again, stress with the hormones and not sleeping, all of these are warning lights from your body. It's not about being broken. You're not broken. We all go through this. Menopause is a normal, natural phase of life, right? But again, it's about starting to better understand what are the natural shifts that your body is going through. And again, I have a sister who is 3 years younger than me. We are experiencing menopause very, very different, right? She's had 3 children. I did not have children. There's a huge difference right then and there. One of the reasons why I probably started menopause, perimenopause earlier, right? And truly what I just hope all of you take from this is to, take it upon yourself, and feel empowered to take your body and your symptoms into your hands and control it yourself. So that's what I have for y'all. I'm going to stop my share. You are very welcome. All righty. Well, that's what I have for you today. Please follow me on LinkedIn. I do these every month. They're a little bit of a different topic each month, but always some part of menopause. The Menopause Wellness series really is about keeping you well and keeping you thriving. So thank you for being here today. For those of you who are listening to the replay, if you have any questions, please, please, please don't hesitate to put them in the comments, shoot me a message on LinkedIn or on YouTube. I will post this on YouTube. And you guys all have a great day. Okay. I leave you with this: healthy living, happy life, everyone. You are just going through menopause. It's just an easy thing once we understand what we are experiencing. So thank you so much and have a great day.